Hi everyone, welcome to this presentation on epigenetics and inflammation. I'm very happy to be with you today to do this presentation, and hopefully you'll find it interesting and perhaps learn some things you were not aware of before and take something away that's useful. So I'm going to share the screen with you. And here you can see, hopefully, genes under fire. So my name's Amanda King. I'm a naturopath. I'm a nutritional therapist studying integrative oncology under the mentorship of Dr. Naisha Winters with MTIH. And I also work heavily with nutrigenomics and epigenetics in my practice. So without further ado, inflammation. So as you can see here, the word flame, it comes in the word inflammation. And as it suggests, it's actually to do with heat and redness and swelling. It's a functional process in the body, so we need inflammation. Inflammation will happen whenever you have, for example, a cut on the body. You'll see that the area becomes inflamed and red, and that's important because we want to get the white blood cells, and the immune system wants to get those immune factors to the site so that the repair can happen. And it's important so that the wound stays closed to have that inflammation. That would be acute inflammation. So we do need to have it. It's a survival mechanism. And so that's obviously important. And we also need that kind of reaction when we have a kind of, let's say, a pathogen or a virus or bacteria in the body. So we want to have that kind of an immune reaction so we can heal ourselves. There is a difference between acute inflammation and chronic inflammation. So acute is when obviously we're fighting off the invader, or we've got some kind of trauma. Chronic inflammation is different. This is actually where we experience that kind of redness, that swelling all the time. So it's not going down. We're constantly in this high alert state. And that's chronic. That means that we're constantly inflamed. And the drivers of that in modern society, there are many of them. We've got sugar, we've got stress, deficiencies, nutritional deficiencies can drive inflammation. We don't have the right tools to do the job. Imbalances in hormones, these are all interlinked with one another. Oxidative stress, which we'll come on to further in the presentation. Toxins, stuff we make inside our own bodies, which would be endogenous, or toxins from outside, which would be called exogenous. A lack of movement. Sitting is the new smoking. So we need to keep moving. Our bodies expect it. And poor detoxification. There are certain foods that can drive inflammation, in particular omega-6s. We'll talk a bit more about those later as well. Seed oils, again, sugar, trans fats, grains, and sorry about the typo there, processed foods. Just to really explain what that means is we have pathways in the body that produce for situations of acute inflammation, which is what we know we want to have inflammation in the body to react to the pathogens or to heal the body. So we have two pathways, COX and LOX pathways, and these help us to produce something called prostaglandins. Prostaglandins are pro-inflammatory. They do obviously have a function. We do need them, but not so much as we are actually experiencing in modern society. Non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs do inhibit these prostaglandins. They actually inhibit the production of prostaglandins because they inhibit the cyclooxygenase and the LOX pathways. Basically, they stop them from producing prostaglandins and certain other things called eicosanoids. But we aren't deficient in non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, which would be things like diclofenac or ibuprofen, etc. So that while they might have a use just in the moment, they might be useful if we are experiencing a lot of pain, for example, or they have their own medical application. If we are suffering with chronic inflammation, then we need to address the root cause. There's something wrong with our environment or our terrain. Our terrain is our body and the environment we inhabit. So we're not deficient in NSAIDs. We might have deficiencies in other areas, which might include a deficiency of movement, a deficiency in good nutrition, etc. So inflammation is a major driver of cancer and of loads of other different kinds of diseases. In particular, I've mentioned here cardiovascular diseases like atherosclerosis, which is commonly seen as a furring up of arteries. That's actually to do with tiny tears on the inside of the vascular system. Also metabolic syndrome with obesity, blood lipid dysregulation. So that really comes with its own imbalances in HDL and LDL cholesterol, actually namely high triglycerides, which is actually the real big risk factor there. Neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, these are diseases of inflammation. So we want to reduce inflammation. There's also a blood sugar dysregulation issue happening within these conditions too. Mental illnesses as well, depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, bipolar, OCD as well. There is a bit of a revolution happening, which I would love to share with you about, the work of Dr. Georgia Ede, which is excellent. Her book, Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind, and also Jan Bazuki, who has the website metabolicmind.org. These people are change makers. They're in revolutionizing the metabolic, the psychiatry arena, because we're learning that these issues are metabolically driven, and so there's a lot now that we know we can do about that. We also have issues of autoimmunity, which are driven by inflammation too. So things like ankylosing spondylitis, which is characterized by inflammation in the lower spine, and rheumatoid arthritis, which is to do mostly with joints, which are obviously inflamed. So what is epigenetics? Epigenetics is the science of how the environment that you inhabit, or you yourself, which is the environment, how that actually directs your genetic expression. So we have, as I was saying, the environment is you. It's everything that you are, everything you eat, how you think, how you move, who you surround yourself with, what you're reading, what you're watching. And your genes, well, you're not going to change your DNA. You do have SNPs, singular nucleotide polymorphisms. Everybody has SNPs, which are little mutations on your genes, and these direct the expression of those genes. So it's a tendency, it's not an absolute determinant. So your DNA is laid out. We all have our genetic profile, but these mutations we inherit from mum and dad, and these are the tendencies that we can then affect by our environment. So once we know what those SNPs are, we can actually attempt with supplementation or with lifestyle modifications or nutrition, we can actually change the genetic expression. So almost switching the genes on or silencing the genes. So just so that you're aware, there are nucleotides. These are the base pairs of your DNA. We won't go too much into it. A, G, C, T, the names are up there on the screen. And it's actually a swapping around or a shift in those nucleotides that causes these SNPs. So we can see that's occurred there. Okay, so with inflammation and epigenetics, we know that our genetic code is a bit like Lego blocks. So our individual genetic code determines how our bodies are built and how they function. And as I said previously, these SNPs will cause our genes to over or underexpress, which basically means they can run fast or slow. And what that can actually mean for you is that we can actually see, for example, if you're slow at converting nutrients with certain SNPs, that might tell us that you need more of that nutrient to have the same effect. Some of us will have SNPs that mean we're much more prone to chronic inflammation. And as we know, that's a driver for many chronic diseases. Okay, so it sounds like a complicated subject. It can be. And how do we make sense of epigenetics? How do we make it apply to us in our world and our lifestyles? I have written clinical application is an art, not an exact science. Excuse me. And the reason why is that while we might be able to see our SNPs and our genes in black and white, clear as day, we've got, for example, a SNP on our MTHFR, which is the famous methylation gene. We might know that we've got a homozygous SNP on that. We've got the same gene from each parent. It's still not an exact science because just looking at that without knowing who you are as a person could really mean anything. It depends what you're supplementing. It depends what your lifestyle's like. What symptoms are you expressing? What has your life been like so far? An experienced clinician will be able to take that information, look at the whole picture, learn about you, what your symptoms are, and then be able to tell you why the symptoms are related to the SNPs that you have, whether it's likely that those SNPs are causing a problem for you or not. Because just because you have a SNP there doesn't mean that it could be a problem. For example, if you have a SNP on your VDR, your vitamin D receptor, but your vitamin D levels in your blood are 150 to 200 nanomoles a litre, then you've got a very good sufficiency in vitamin D, and the impact of that SNP will be minimal. So that's how we might be able to kind of look at that. And also, we never read a gene in isolation. We never even read cycles in isolation. We always look at the big picture. It's important to look at everything in context. So nutrigenomics is defined as the interaction between nutrition and genes, especially when we're looking at treating and preventing disease. But epigenetics, I feel, is a more relevant term because it not only encompasses the interaction between nutrition and genes, but also other modifiable risk factors like movement, which is so important, relationships, meaning and purpose, spirituality or faith, however that manifests for you. Supplementation is a part of that. Your geographical location, do you get a lot of sunlight or not? Your environmental toxicity as well, these are all huge subjects in and of themselves. So oxidative stress, this is at the root of inflammation. So it's defined as an imbalance between the production or accumulation of radical oxygen species, ROS, in cells and tissues, and then the ability of a biological system to detoxify these products. So what that means is the accumulation of toxins, if you like, and your ability to clear them down. So radical oxygen species are sometimes called free radicals. Lots of people have heard of free radicals. Effectively, they're unstable atoms which have unpaired electrons. So they go around looking to stabilize themselves, which means that they cause damage to healthy cells and and basically also your DNA, which does lead to inflammation. Excuse me. So we mentioned the word before, exogenous, coming from outside, outside. These sources are pollution, alcohol, tobacco, smoke. Hopefully that is diminishing with legislations in the West a bit more heavily. Heavy metals, transition metals, industrial solvents, pesticides, and then other drugs, halothane, paracetamol, and radiation. So we know that a lot of these things are in our environment all of the time. We cannot eliminate all toxicity. It's not a question of if we're toxic anymore. Babies are born with toxicity and in their bodies. It's a question of to what extent are we toxic these days. Endogenous, which is produced in the body, are produced in the batteries or the powerhouses of our cells, which are called the mitochondria. Certain organelles within the cell called peroxisomes, and also another organelle, the largest one in the body, the endoplasmic reticulum. You don't need to know what all of these are. And phagocytic cells, which are parts of the immune system like macrophages and things like that. These go in and destroy invaders, but they leave metabolites, they leave residues that are damaging to our body cells that need to be cleared up. So we make these things in the body. This is normal as a result of processes that are quite natural, and we should have these processes, and also exogenous sources too, which in the modern world we're never going to avoid. So what genes are involved with inflammation? So the major gene, which is involved in all inflammation, is NF-kappa beta. We call this the grandmother of inflammation. So with this particular gene and the other inflammation genes, the solutions are fairly similar. We'll come on to that in a bit, but these are upregulated by oxidative stress, which we've talked about, and all of those risk factors which we mentioned. So these are upregulated by those risk factors, but also radiation is a big upregulator of NF-kappa beta. So this does increase it increases inflammation and oxidative stress. Tumor necrosis factor, interleukin-6, interleukin-8, interferon gamma, and C-reactive protein. We can test for these as well. You can speak to your metabolic health practitioner about making sure we have a look at SNPs, for example, on your genes to see if you have upregulated versions of these genes. So which would mean, if you did have SNPs on these, that you would be more prone to inflammation in the same in the circumstances of the same trigger. So if, for example, there are two people with exactly the same environmental trigger, the same level of it, if one person has upregulated, as in faster, SNPs for inflammation, they will drive inflammation faster and much quicker than the person who doesn't have the SNPs. So it just means that they're more impactful. Methylation, that's a subject for another entire presentation, really, but lots of people have heard of methylation. We're doing methylation in all of our cells nearly all of the time, every minute of every day, and it's important for actually the switching on and off of genes as well. So if you have a methyl group is created in the body from the food you eat, so particularly from vitamin B12, which comes from animal protein, choline, which again comes from eggs and animal protein, and obviously folate as well, which comes from green leafy vegetables. So a methyl group itself, just to quickly explain, is a carbon atom with 3 hydrogens branched off it. And what happens with methylation is this little methyl group, we call it, CH3, gets transported and moved around by other molecules like SAMe, for example, which is the master methyl donor, and it gets donated to other molecules to help them to switch on or to silence them. And so the main genes that are involved in this process are MTHFR, MTRR, MTR, DHFR, MAT1A, CBS, and actually these are all related to the conversion of a substance called homocysteine into other molecules, like actually into other amino acids, like cystathionine or like methionine, for example. So you don't need to know all of the details of everything I've just said, except to know really that if you do have SNPs on these, you might be slow at methylating, which will have an impact on nearly every body process. There are other genes involved in the molecules that drive inflammation. For example, iron, HFE, which is associated with hemochromatosis. Ferritin, we know that's the storage of iron. CYP2R1 and VDR, and these are to do with fat-soluble nutrients like vitamin D. So all fat-soluble nutrients are anti-inflammatory. So again, I have mentioned the vitamin D receptor previously. If you do have a SNP on the vitamin D receptor, if you have a homozygous SNP, so you've inherited one from each parent, and it's very, very slow, and you are still within the range of your standard healthcare provider, say for example, you come back and your medical doctor says, yeah, you have enough vitamin D in your blood, but you're perhaps on the lower end of that standard range, and you have a heavy SNP on your vitamin D receptor, you could be experiencing a subclinical deficiency, and you wouldn't know that, and neither would your doctor if they didn't know how to check your SNPs. So this is one example of why it's so important. That could be a driver of inflammation completely under the radar. So it's really important to have your SNPs checked. HLA genes, so these are to do with autoimmunity. There are many different HLA genes. In particular, they tend to be associated with gluten or non-celiac, non-gluten driven celiac. To be honest with you, I also agree with Dr. Nasha, who never feels that there's any real place for gluten in the diet. I agree. When I work with my clients, gluten and grains generally are out. They're pro-inflammatory. They do dismantle zonulin in the gut. They contribute to leaky gut syndrome, and they obviously drive inflammation. So as far as I'm concerned, there's no place in a healthy diet for modern grains. MTNR1B, this is to do with melatonin, and this is really interesting because melatonin is an anti-inflammatory, antioxidant molecule. It's also a hormone. It's made out of serotonin. If you're a poor producer of melatonin, then you will struggle to sleep and you'll struggle to stay asleep. If you have a SNP on the MTNR1B, that's quite interesting because a SNP on this gene actually is to do with sensitivity to melatonin, and it means you would probably be more likely to experience the effects of melatonin, but then your body might feel that it is actually not necessarily asleep, but it would be in a sleep state. So it means that if, for example, you ate late at night, you would be much more susceptible to blood sugar dysregulation and have a risk of type 2 diabetes. So it's important. These are all drivers of inflammation. It's important to be aware of how all of these interact with one another. Excuse me. And then we move on to CYP1B1, CYP1A2, NQO1, hormones, estrogens. Estrogen can be a driver of inflammation, and many of you will be aware estrogen is a big driver of certain cancers. If you do have SNPs on CYP1B1, 1A2, this will mean that potentially you might make the more toxic versions of estrogens, 4-hydroxy, 16-hydroxy as well. These would then need to be metabolized, and these can turn into, it's the depurinating effect. So basically it's DNA damage that's caused, and they are exacerbated when you have, the damage is actually exacerbated when you have other SNPs in conjunction with these. So without going into too much detail, this is where the art of interpretation comes in, and also looking at what factors are in your diet and lifestyle. What is the family history? How well are you methylating? Do you have, are you having a vegan diet? And if so, you probably don't have, almost certainly won't have the right ingredients to methylate properly, which means you will potentially have a buildup of estrogens, can't clear them down, and that can lead to hormonally driven chronic disease states. So it's important to be aware, what SNPs do you have here as well. So there are also environmental triggers, because the environment and lifestyle, your diet and lifestyle, is the biggest part of this. Genes are important, but we're talking around about 20% or less of the picture. So the rest of that is, what are you actually doing with your diet and lifestyle? So I do want to just bring a little bit of the politics of seed oils in here. I think it's important. Omega-6s, these are pro-inflammatory. We mentioned it previously. These are activated down the COX and LOX pathways and others, and they produce these group 2 eicosanoids, which are pro-inflammatory. They do produce also, in some cases, other kinds of eicosanoids, which can be anti-inflammatory, just to be fair, but in the main, this is a pro-inflammatory pathway, and it ends up making AA, arachidonic acid, which is pro-inflammatory. So recently, there's been some controversy because Zoe and Professor Sarah Berry have said that seed oils shouldn't be demonized and should be used as a dietary staple. Upon investigation, it has been found that Professor Berry belongs to something called the British Nutrition Foundation, which is a lobbying group funded by the processed food industry. I have provided references, and that processed food industry includes Arla, Coca-Cola, General Mills, which produce flours, Kellogg's, Mars, PepsiCo, and Tate & Lyle, who make sugar. So there is a lot. It's important to be aware. When you look at advice, if it seems to be conflicting, it's worth going back to source. Excuse me, who are the people giving you that advice? Who are they being paid by? Where is that information from? It's not just a simple case of one person's opinion versus another person's opinion. It's important to be aware that there are forces at work that want to make money out of the situation. So that's important. So other environmental triggers. So yeah, we've talked about processed foods. Processed foods are going to be made generally as cheaply as possible. Cheap equals vegetable oils and seed oils, and those are going to be pro-inflammatory, which are going to drive inflammation, which will lead to those chronic diseases. Trans fats, saturated fats, I've mentioned, and puffers and muffers. Okay, so that might look a little bit confusing. Saturated fats, polyunsaturated fats, and monounsaturated fats are not the drivers of inflammation if they are the right kinds. So I will explain this in a lot more detail. So a trans fat is a fat that's been altered. It's been adjusted. It's usually with heat or oxidation, and it alters the molecule. So when we think about saturated fats, just so that you can understand what that is, We have basically a molecule, which is the lipid, and on this molecule, let's just say it's a circle, just for argument's sake. There are little branches, a bit like, how would you describe it? Like a sun with rays coming off it. And each of those branches has an H on it, a hydrogen. And a saturated fat would be completely full of little H's on each of the rays of the sun. And it would be, because it would be a saturated fat. So all of those would have hydrogens. A monounsaturated fatty acid would be missing one. One hydrogen is missing. So mono, one. So it means that with that hydrogen missing, it's a little bit unstable. It's prone to another molecule, another atom jumping on there, which can cause it to be oxidized, for example, which might turn it rancid. Polyunsaturated fatty, let me go back a step. Monounsaturated fatty acids include avocados and olive oil, for example. Really good for your health, especially cold pressed, dark glass bottles, fresh olives, fresh avocados. Polyunsaturated fatty acids can include omega-6s or they can include omega-3s. It depends where on the lipid chain there is an alteration. So it's at number 3 on the omega-3, it's at number 6 on the omega-6. So what that means is that, let's say with the polyunsaturated fatty acid, many of those H's on the ends of the sticks or the rays of the sun are missing. This makes it highly unstable and highly prone to damage by oxygen and highly prone to damage by heat. So we want to make sure that we have that in as fresh produce as possible, and polyunsaturated fatty acids from seed oils are going to be vegetable oil, sunflower oil, it's going to be safflower oil, those kinds of things, rapeseed oil, I think you guys call it colza, canola. Though I get it confused with the French words. So yeah, so basically canola, I think, rapeseed in England. And those are pro-inflammatory because they are unstable. As soon as they're out of the seed, they react with the oxygen. Even if they're cold pressed, they will react with the oxygen, which will cause it to oxidize, and that will mean that it's a rancid fat and it will drive inflammation. On the alternative side of that is omega-3 fatty acids, and that's going to be hopefully from your oily fish, and that would be salmon, mackerel, sardines, herrings, anchovies, and wild-caught salmon, if I didn't say that. Again, these oils are unstable, so when you supplement with omega-6 oils, which is anti-inflammatory, that will bring down inflammation, it should be, ideally, triple distilled pharmaceutical grade. It's better to get the really high quality stuff. They can be, there is talk about contaminants in these products if you go for an inferior product. I'm not affiliated with anyone. I wouldn't recommend any particular brand. Just look for good quality when you look for your supplement, or speak to your metabolic health practitioner. Pesticides, glyphosate is at the root of a lot of problems. Glyphosate will, again, it will dismantle the gut lining effectively. It will cause all kinds of problems, wipe out your microbiome. If you have a SNP, a mutation on a gene called PON1, that's even worse. You're really going to struggle to detoxify pesticides. So again, it's something to be aware of if you live in an area that's routinely sprayed with glyphosate. Trauma is actually an interesting one, because where I've used the word trigger, I saw something recently which said when we are looking at root cause, we excuse me, let's say we're looking at type 2 diabetes, which was caused by inflammation, which was caused by overeating, sugary foods, which was caused by addictions, which was caused by trauma. And so we have, as adults, once we become aware of ourselves, we have a responsibility to address, to evolve. And trauma, there are lots of good resources out there to help us work through our trauma. Excuse me. Infections. Again, this is not really any great, it's not, It's not news. Infections are effectively the acute response to inflammation. So that's what it should be. There shouldn't be a chronic infection. It can happen, of course, but where we get an infection in a cut, or we end up with some kind of contact with some disease or something that's contagious, we should have inflammation. So obviously that does upregulate that activity in the body, but it shouldn't be chronic. Molds and aflatoxins. So aflatoxins are a kind of mold. These are found in peanuts, actually Brazil nuts as well. Other kinds of nuts contain it too. These go down the same pathways as molds, and black molds, aspergillus, for example. And these can cause systemic problems in the gut. We can end up with a systemic infection, which can lead to chronic inflammation. And if we also have SNPs on certain CYP enzyme, CYP genes, which code for enzymes that help us to detoxify molds, if we're slower at doing that and we're faster at turning molds into toxic metabolites, and then we're not very good. We're basically radical oxygen species. That's what we were talking about previously. So if we are quick to make these free radicals and slow to get rid of them, we're going to have all sorts of problems with inflammation there. PAH, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. If you live in a city, you're not going to be able to avoid these. And again, this is a detoxification issue. This can lead to inflammation too. It's ideal if you can get a medical grade air filter if you live in a city for your house. And have that on. There are some good products out there. Parasites also, if they're unchecked, these can become highly inflammatory to the whole body, systemic inflammation, and opportunistic bacteria as well. Okay, so how do we combat inflammation? Now we know what's causing inflammation. Now we know something about how some of those genes can be affected by the environment. We've mentioned already omega-3, so this is highly anti-inflammatory. We want to give you an idea about omega-3s. In Paleolithic times, we would have eaten a lot of, obviously, clean fish. We hadn't polluted the seas by then, which were full of omega-3s. The cows, or whatever it was, the mammoths, would have been eating the grass, which was full of omega-3s. They would have been obviously in the sun as well, taking the vitamin D in, which is another thing. But basically, the meats that we ate would have been high in omega-3s. We wouldn't have had much omega-6. So we would have had around about a 1-to-1 ratio of omega-3 to omega-6. These days, omega-6 is in all the grains, the processed foods, the seed oils. Everybody's having a lot of omega-6s and not much omega-3s. So the ratio is thought to be between 15 to 20 to 1. That's 15 to 20 parts of omega-6 to 1 of omega-3. This is a highly pro-inflammatory environment, and omega-3s include the fat docosahexaenoic acid, which is DHA, and the brain is mostly made out of DHA. So, and our nervous system, which is what our brain is made out of, needs these omega-3 fatty acids. So it's not really surprising we're seeing a rise in illnesses that also involve the brain. You know, this also goes back to metabolic mind, why we need to reduce omega-6s and boost omega-3s. So healthy fats, I've already mentioned to you about animal fats. Saturated fats are not bad for you. It does depend on what the source is. It's important because a lot of toxins are stored in fat, to make sure that when you eat animal fat and animal products, that they do come from clean, grass-fed, grass-finished, pastured, wild-caught, organic. That kind of paradigm really is what you're looking for. The natural. There are good providers out there of these products, not the industrial feedlot products, not the grain-fed cows. You are what you eat eats. So that's important to be aware of. Movement. This will combat inflammation. I've written Goldilocks zone. So it's not too much and not too little, not too hot, not too cold, because too little movement, your spine will decay. It's as bad as smoking. It's compared with smoking. Too much movement, if you really are beasting it in the gym too much, it's too much exercise, you're going to create free radicals. So you're going to create a detoxification problem. So again, it's not too much, not too little, but consistency is important. Leafy greens, this is really the foundation of methylation. You want to be having at least 2 handfuls of leafy greens every single day. Clean, organic, ideally low-carb vegetables as well. Mediterranean diet is shown over and over and over to be associated with the best health outcomes. I'm pretty sure that's, yeah, there's at least one I'm thinking of, Blue Zones, that falls into this in Greece. And actually this is lots and lots of vegetables, low-carb vegetables, lots of fish, meats and things like that. So it's important. Raw milk, raw dairy and full fat and organic. There is a difference between raw milk and raw dairy and cooked or pasteurized milk and pasteurized dairy. The profile is completely different. Raw milk is anti-inflammatory. Cooked or pasteurized milk, it's pro-inflammatory. So, and also you've got enzymes naturally occurring in raw milk. You've got all of the fat that was originally there that should be there, containing all of the fat-soluble nutrients, all anti-inflammatory. If you can get raw milk in your country, because it is banned in certain countries, then you should try to do that. Healing broth. Broth it can be anti-inflammatory. It's full of nutrients that promote healthy joints, boost your immune system. It's great for healing the gut. There are lots of the process of making broth actually. The heat process over a longer period of time breaks down the proteins, makes everything much more bioavailable. In my opinion, bone broth, meat stocks, meat broths are one of the most healing foods you can eat pretty much at any time. Intermittent fasting, it's very important so that you're in a catabolic state, which is where you're starting to break down and clean up. This is a really important, more than 12, ideally 12 to 16, 13 to 16 hours a day of fasting will get you into something called autophagy, which is where your body will start to clear up using something called sirtuins, which we'll get to in a minute. Will start to clear up some of the damage that's caused by modern living and that's causing inflammation. And in there also I've put breath work and cold plunges. Wim Hof has been showing amazing things with his cold plunges. Breath work is also shown to have amazing outcomes for health. So these are things that can upregulate your metabolism, bring a sense of peace, connection to self, very important. Certain supplements will downregulate inflammation because they will block the COX and LOX pathways that we talked about previously. They're not for everybody. So turmeric, quercetin, so turmeric itself, quercetin is found in capers and red onions and you can supplement it. Green tea contains EG, CG, also other compounds like L-theanine, which is particularly calming, and PQQ, which is an antioxidant that helps you with methylation. So these things are great, but they do inhibit the COX and LOX pathways a bit like ibuprofen would. But that can be a problem because it also inhibits, so that's good if you want to downregulate inflammation, but they also slow down genes called COMT, MAOA and MAOB, and these genes are involved in the breakdown, the metabolism of neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine, adrenaline, noradrenaline. They're also involved in the breakdown of estrogens. So if, for example, you've got a hormonally driven cancer or some issues with hormones, you might want to avoid those particular supplements because they would slow down your ability to detoxify inflammatory estrogen even more. So this is where it becomes an art. We would need to look at your genes, have a look at what you're supplementing, what you're eating and what your symptoms are and make a decision based on that. Excuse me. N-acetylcysteine, this is, it basically is a cysteine donor, and cysteine is a precursor. It's one of the ingredients that makes the master detoxifier, which is called glutathione. And glutathione helps in the mitochondria to dismantle something called hydrogen peroxide. And that actually is a free radical that we make in the body as a result of just normal natural processes. But it's important that we have enough cysteine so that we can make glutathione. Sometimes certain people are missing genes for glutathione. We'll talk about that in a minute. Then we have to support them in different ways, either by supplementing glutathione directly, or if the genes are slower, we need to make sure that you have cysteine donors, basically, either from food or from N-acetylcysteine. SOD and CAT, so superoxide dismutase and catalase, these are part of what we call the antioxidant cascade. Again, antioxidants are going to neutralize those free radicals, those radical oxygen species, and that's going to help the body to have less DNA damage, less inflammation, which is going to mean the body's not on high alert all the time, and therefore it will not express dis-ease in the form of cancers and other kinds of chronic disease. Other examples of antioxidants include polyphenols, anthocyanins. These give fruits and vegetables their different colours, and there's a range of different kinds of polyphenols in all sorts of different vegetables and fruits. I would say limit the fruits, no more than 2 a day. Make sure one of them is berries or both of them are berries, and make sure you have a range of low-carb vegetables, maybe 8 to 10 portions a day, a minimum of 6, remembering a portion is a cupped handful. So anti-inflammatory genes, I've just talked about some of these actually. So superoxide dismutase, catalase, glutathione peroxidase, TIMS, these are all genes that are in some way involved in either neutralizing free radicals or repairing damaged DNA. So we want to make sure that when we check for SNPs, mutations, that we make sure we cover our body's needs. So if we have an increased need for antioxidants, we could supplement. We could even supplement with the enzyme itself. Or we could just make absolutely certain that our diet contains the necessary ingredients for the slow genes to have what it needs when it's ready to synthesize these enzymes. Glutathione, we've already said, it's the master detoxifier. Now, a lot of people are actually missing the GSTM1 gene completely. And if that's null, if it's not there, then it's really a good idea to check out the other glutathione genes and just see, have you got anything else that's coming into the rescue here? What you might be looking at is 5 lanes of traffic being taken down to 3 lanes of traffic. And what we might want to do is perhaps give you some glutathione there by opening that lane up, which allows those detox, allows the toxins to be taken out of the city, out of the cell, out of you. So it's important. Methylation, again, in a way, this is anti-inflammation. I've mentioned SAMe there, that's S-adenosyl methionine. This is actually the master methyl donor. So this is the one that carries the little molecule CH3, the methyl group, around the body, making sure that the genes are switched on or that they're silenced. So we want to make sure that all of these genes are working properly. And if they have SNPs, if there is a nutritional deficiency, that we support the body to make SAMe so that other genes can be switched on, which can then go in to do repair, which can then do conversions of inflammatory substances like homocysteine into more benign products or things that we can turn into elements for detoxification, for example, or energy. So VKORC, VDR, BCMO1 and 2. Okay, so we're talking about vitamin K, which is actually found in leafy green vegetables, vitamin D, the vitamin D receptor, and BCMO1 and 2 is to do with beta-carotene conversion into retinol, which is vitamin A. So if you have SNPs on these, you're either going to need more to have the same effect, or you're going to be almost incapable of doing the conversion at all, which is specifically beta-carotene, which comes from green leafy vegetables and orange vegetables and fruits. This is commonly touted as the vegan vitamin A. That's actually just rubbish, because if you do have a SNP on BCMO1, you probably can't eat enough orange vegetables in a day to do the necessary conversion to retinol. We have evolved to eat animal products, animal foods. We've evolved to eat animals. We've evolved to eat fish. We need animal fats to be healthy. It's clear as day in our genes. And what we've not evolved to eat is grain-fed animals. We've evolved to eat, animals in their natural environment. So if you do have SNPs on BCMO1, you will need to supplement retinol, vitamin A, or you'll need to make sure that you're eating lots of vitamin A rich foods like cod liver itself, and grass-fed beef, etc. Eggs as well, if they're high quality. Vitamin D generally, in the Northern Hemisphere at least, we generally need to, well, in fact in all, we do need to supplement. And vitamin K, it's a good idea to supplement vitamin K with with vitamin D so that calcium levels don't rise. Calcium is a driver of cancer, so that's important as well. But this does sound confusing. It's worth speaking again with your metabolic health practitioner about that. If you do have SNPs on FADS1 and 2, then in fact, if you don't have SNPs on FADS1 and 2, you would be faster at doing a conversion of omega-3s into the most usable kind, most anti-inflammatory kind, which was the DHA that I mentioned. That's good, but it also means you're very fast at converting the omega-6s into the most pro-inflammatory kind, AA. So actually, it depends on your diet. If you have no SNPs on FADS1, but you're eating a load of processed foods, you're going to go right down that pro-inflammatory pathway much faster. But if you're eating a good diet, natural, species-specific, lots of oily fish, clean, organic food, it's going to be the most beneficial. SNPs would be strangely of benefit to someone actually who is having a processed diet, but their diet won't be of benefit. So it's just how it's applied. Oh, sorry. Sirtuins, these have recently been discovered and talked about by Dr. David Sinclair in his book Lifespan, and he talks a lot about these. He's been trying to activate them with certain nutrients like resveratrol. Jury's out on whether that works very effectively or not. I think there's some work being done in that area, but sirtuins themselves, these are created by NAD+, boosted by NAD+, and NAD+ is made from TMG and NMN, which are actually being pushed out in the supplemental world quite a bit at the moment. That's trimethylglycine, which is also known as betaine, and also NMN, nicotinamide mononucleotide. So these two go in to help you make NAD+, which is made in the mitochondria, and these help to push the production of sirtuins, and sirtuins do the cleanup job in the body. We want sirtuins to be activated. This is part of what's known as a bit of an anti-aging strategy at the moment. Lots of people are pushing to activate sirtuins to have a bigger health span. And then finally, I've written in PGC1 alpha, adiponectin. There are actually other kinds of genes that are involved in upregulating metabolism and downregulating inflammation. And these are actually activated by anything that seems to get you in something called the zone of hormesis. So this is basically it's cellular stress. And in his book, Go Wild, John Ratey, great book, John Ratey talks about the zone of hormesis and how our cells function best when they're under a little bit of stress. So actually, if we eat turmeric, depending on whether you've got a COMT SNP, if we have ginger, chilies, if we do exercise, if we do cold plunges, intermittent fasting, that kind of stuff, and there are certain other supplements like berberine, for example. I'm pretty sure that upregulates it too. And this is all going to activate something called the AMPK pathway, which is the catabolic pathway, and that's going to mean you have a raised metabolism, more sirtuins, less inflammation overall, and hopefully longevity. So as you can see here, we do need those fat-soluble vitamins. We need them from our diet, and we might need them from our supplements, A, D, K, E, and omega-3 fatty acids. SNPs on our genes might mean that we cannot convert what we need in our diet, and we have a need to supplement or to eat the animal foods that contain the ready-made versions of these nutrients. And it's not just enough to eat the animal foods, it needs to be clean sources because they're not all created equal. And to conclude, what can you do, or what you can do to have a diet and lifestyle that helps to combat inflammation? Avoid vegan diets. Vegetarian diets need to be very carefully managed. In my opinion, it's not possible to have optimal health this way long term. And avoid the standard UK, standard American diet, which do suck and are sad, and try and avoid those kinds of standard diets which are full of processed foods, and they will promote inflammation. So a natural diet for a human is what we're looking for, and that's going to be slightly individualized according to your SNPs. Movement, as I've said before, sitting is the new smoking. Make sure you're moving all the time. Your body was designed to move and stand. Fat-soluble nutrients, we mentioned it on the previous page. One thing that I haven't been able to really get to in this presentation is the absolute need of human beings for connection to our fellow humans, our family, our neighbours, love for ourselves, for our planet, for each other. Grounding, connecting with Pachamama, Mother Earth, putting our feet on the earth, our hands on the trees, being connected. It's important, and having meaning and purpose. All of these things, they do combat inflammation because they help us with stress. And when we're stressed, we produce cortisol, and cortisol will drive inflammation, and it will also reduce serotonin as well, which will mean that you don't feel as happy. Serotonin is the happy hormone. Test your terrain under the care of a metabolic health practitioner or advocate. There is a practitioner directory on Dr. Nasha's website with the Metabolic Terrain Institute of Health. Always make sure that you work with your health practitioner and when you want to get your SNPs tested and the application of that into your diet. I do hope that you found it useful and interesting, and if you would like to check any of the references, they are available. I can make this available to all. Thank you very much. I'm very grateful for your attention and time.